And there are two proposals out there. I don't necessarily agree with these proposals, but I think they're interesting. One proposal is to use the GST. So instead of having, when we need to slow down the economy, instead of the Reserve Bank hiking interest rates, they might, which only affects borrowers, they lift the GST a little bit, which affects everyone. When the economy needs to be sped up, they reduce the GST. That's one idea. Another idea is the superannuation guarantee. We all pay superannuation, 10, 11% of our income goes in superannuation. Another proposal has been, instead of using the interest rate as the brake and the accelerator, you use the level of superannuation. So when we need to slow down the economy, everybody pays 12, 13, 13.5%. Takes money out of the economy. One of the things I like about that is people don't lose that money. At the moment, when interest rates go up, you're just writing a bigger check to the bank and you never see that money again. Doing it through the superannuation guarantee means that, yes, we will be taking money out of the economy when it's going too fast. You have to do that. But you're not losing that. You're just saving more for your retirement.
Hi, perhaps you recognize me. It's your favorite president.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
Anybody in this country doesn't minimise their tax. They want their heads ring.
Socialists don't like ordinary people choosing, or they might not choose socialism.
The answer is might, because I want to do you slowly. I was saved by God to make America great again.
We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Stephen Tripp. Thank you to everyone who is joining us. Hopefully this is coming through to Facebook. I got a little bit of a comment there saying that there's some problems with Facebook, but hopefully it's coming through loud and clear now. I don't know how my image is going to be. I've been having a lot of problems, technical problems with my image. It's been very fuzzy, and you'll know that from watching last week's show. It looks like we might have the same problem this week, but you should be able to hear me clearly, hopefully, and also hopefully we can see and hear our guest very well tonight as well. We'll see how we go. I've got a new setup here, moved house, new internet connection, back on the NBN. So we can talk about how useless the NBN is and how many problems we have with that whole thing and how much money we spent on it. It's a big lemon, but that'll be a discussion for another time. Maybe let's talk about tonight. We've got a very interesting guest on, a thought leader. I always like talking to people who have a lot of ideas and want to take Australia into a better direction. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion tonight. But before we get there, I'm going to let you know about how you can follow us. And like I always do, and it's by heading to commandingthenarrative.com. The website is the best place to go to keep up to date with everything that we are doing. All the previous podcasts, like the one that we did last week, talking about the rise of One Nation and whether it's organic or fabricated or whatever it might be. We went into a lot of detail about that with Adam Zara and also Sam Buno. And previous to that, we had Lou O'Brien on, the federal member for Wide Bay. That was a really good discussion. I really enjoyed talking to Lou O'Brien. And of course, recently we spoke to Bernie Finn, which was a great episode as well. You get all the latest articles and newsletters on the website as well. Also some surveys if you want to participate in those. And if you want to know who's coming up on the podcast this week, you can head to the website. All the information is there, so you can get all the links to whether you want to watch it on Facebook or Rumble or YouTube. You can get it all there. And also any events that we're doing, like this one on Saturday, this coming Saturday out in Dunedoo. So if you're in Coolah or Dubbo or Wellington, any of the areas around there and concerned about the renewable energy zone that's being built out there, come along to this event. It's called the Reality of Renewables Community Town Hall. It'll be at the Dunedoo Bowling Club at 6:30 p.m. As I said, on Saturday, February 21. Tickets are free, so you don't need to book tickets. Just come along. We want to see you there. We're going to be having Stuart Bonds and also Senator Sean Bell from One Nation. They're going to be doing a tour of the Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone throughout the day. They're going to be seeing it up close and personal, as am I. It's going to be very interesting to see all that stuff up close and see it in the flesh and see if it is really as devastating as some of the farmers out there are saying. I'm sure it is. I can't imagine they're lying. So that's going to be very interesting. And then we're going to be relaying those thoughts to the community at that town hall. So please come along. As I said, if you are in Dunedoo or Coolah or any of the surrounding areas, please. We want to see you there. We want to hear from you, hear your stories. And that's a big part of it, hearing the community concerns and being just giving you the opportunity to be listened to. That's a lot of the feedback I'm getting. A lot of the people out there in those communities don't feel like they're being listened to by government. So this will be an opportunity for that. Also, if you want to contribute to Commanding the Narrative, throw us a few dollars, help to pay a lot of the bills. You can head to Buy Me a Coffee, throw us a few dollars there, helps pay for the stream, helps pay for the website, and also, most importantly, gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling inside. You can also, if you're watching on Rumble, there's a Rumble tip jar you can donate to us as well if you choose. That would be much appreciated if you do decide to do that. And lastly, before we get to our great guest tonight, Australians for Better Government. It's a year old now. We've been striving to reform our system of government. It's not policy stuff, but it's more focused on our actual system of government itself. Our guest was at our recent event in Adelaide and spoke very, very well. A very interesting speech that he gave about the Senate. But are you sick of the way Australia is being governed? If you are, head to australiansforbetter.com and check out everything that we're trying to do at Australians for Better Government. But let's get into it, because I'm sure you're sick of watching my blurry image. But tonight's show, we've got Michael Arbon. He is a political commentator. He's got his own radio show now, and he's also a political staffer, having worked with Ralph Babet, Senator Ralph Babet. He's got a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge and insight. So it's going to be very interesting. I'm looking forward to this. Michael Arbon, welcome to Commanding the Narrative.
G'day, Steve. It's a pleasure to join you. I don't really love being called a political staffer because I don't really like them myself, but I've sort of found myself in this job, and that seems to be a title that I'm stuck with for the time being anyway. And you called me an ideas man earlier, and that made me remember a great classic Aussie movie, The Castle. Remember Daryl Kerrigan? You're an ideas man, Steve. Hopefully my ideas are slightly more founded in some sort of substance than Steve. But I love that movie, and I make sure my kids watch it an awful lot. And we need to give them that solid grounding and what it means to be a Aussie with a decent sense of humour.
Yeah. Look, mate, I want to ask you about your time in Parliament as a staffer, but before we get there, you haven't been on the show before, so some people may have come across you on other podcasts or also watching the footage from our Australians for Better Government event recently. But for those who don't know you, give us a bit of your background. How did you find your way into politics?
Yeah, I fell into it, to be brutally honest. So I grew up on the west coast of South Australia on a wheat, barley and sheep farm. Sort of spent all of my childhood there, and looking back on it, I lived a very simple, good life where I learned to work, and I learned, the highs and lows of farming, droughts and floods and all sorts of things, which was an excellent grounding in life. I left home at 17, moved to Adelaide to try and play footy. Played it in the SNFL level there for a while, but worked out after a while. I wasn't good enough to get drafted, so that was a good life lesson. From there, I went back on the farm for a bit and gave it a crack, but decided that I was going to make my own way in life. So I moved back to Adelaide. I started a fitness business for about 4 or 5 years. And then I got into finance. So I've been running my own finance business for the last 12 years, married, 3 kids, another one on the way now. So, having a child is the ultimate act of optimism. So here we are, we're trying to grow the population ourselves. And I ran for the Senate back in 2022. Having been a long-term Liberal Party member, I was very disappointed with the response to COVID and various other things that were happening in the state. And to be honest, I was sick of yelling at the TV. So I said to the wife, I'm going to stick my hand up. So I did, and fortunately got pre-selected to run for the Senate. Missed out in 2022, but out of that opportunity arose some sort of public life, doing interviews like this. And Senator Babet gave me a call, and I started working for him ever since in Parliament, which has been a real eye-opening experience. But one thing I can tell you, Steve, is I'm determined to not become one of them. Everyone in our team has never worked in politics before, and we come in with a worldview that we have too much government and government has too much power, and they call themselves lawmakers, but we try and come at politics with that perspective of liberty preservers. It's our job to make sure that what happens in Canberra doesn't take away the rights of the average Australian. So I guess that's a bit of a summary for you, but we'll kick on.
No, it's interesting. Similar story to me. COVID was the real catalyst to get me involved in politics. I mean, I've always been politically minded and interested in it, but it was that push that I needed to get involved. As with a lot of people, I met a lot of people around that time, that COVID period, that 2022 election, that a lot of people felt that way. A lot of people feel, whether you might call it the freedom movement or whatever you might want to call it, that we weren't successful and we didn't get anywhere. But a lot of us have done things in our own way. And in politics, it's a long game. If you look at anyone who's succeeded in politics, it's taken them a very long time. Look, Albanese, 30 years before he becomes prime minister. John Howard is a similar story, but very long time in politics before he got the top job. With that in mind, where do you think we are on that spectrum? A lot of a lot of those people that stepped into the political realm in response to COVID and the erosion of our freedoms, we're 5 years in, 6 years in. How do you think we're going?
What's that quote, Steve? Effort doesn't guarantee results, but a lack of effort guarantees failure. I think that's the motto that you have to live by in this game, because working in the federal Senate, often when there are votes that come up that may take away freedom of speech or freedom of association or whatever it might be, or potentially risk that anyway, the vote's usually about 6 good senators voting to preserve your rights and the rest voting to throw them away or abstaining from the vote, which is practically the same as voting to take them away. But I think we have made progress. Politically, if you look at the parliament numbers, maybe not. But if you just look at the public sentiment in terms of trust in government, it's fallen a lot. And it hasn't fallen because for the wrong reasons. It's fallen because people have started to take a bit of an interest in just how much government is involved in their life. I can't put a garden shed in my backyard without getting authority. Government is involved in almost every aspect of our lives now, and it hasn't always been that way. But I think for decades, Aussies just got on with their life. We've got a very sort of happy-go-lucky attitude to life, she'll be right type attitude. But no, she won't be right unless we continue to fight to preserve the rights that make Australia a free democracy. Without defending those rights, we slowly slip towards tyranny. It's a fact, Plato wrote about it, 2,500 years ago, about the descent from democracy to tyranny is sort of the way that it goes unless we fight really, really hard. So I'm quite impressed by the engagement that we're getting from the general public in terms of taking an interest in bills. And I think when the government, there's a couple of big catalysts in the last couple of years, and it's probably not the COVID era. It's after that when the government's attempted to pass, for example, a misinformation, disinformation bill. And the mistake they made there was they gave the people some time to think about it. Most of the bills I see pass Parliament, they're guillotined and they rush through in a week, and most people don't notice them. But with that bill, there was an inquiry, people put in submissions, pretty much all of them opposed it. And there was enough time for people to get their heads around it and decide, no, we don't want that. And that was the first time I've seen the government so embarrassed that they had to actually withdraw the bill from the Senate before there was a vote because they were going to lose. And I think the other catalyst, which was another example whereby the people had sufficient time to get their heads around an issue, was the Voice to Parliament referendum. That was another example of the people having enough time to critically think about what was proposed and then flat out reject it. So, time is not the government's best friend. And if sometime in the near or distant future we get credible opposition or actually a government that values liberty, the people will have sufficient time and will become more and more engaged in what they're doing in Canberra behind closed doors.
When you spoke at ABG Revival in Adelaide at the end of last year, your speech revolved around how the Senate, which is meant to be the House of Review, has become the House of Approval. And a lot of these bills just get guillotined and pushed through. And I understand that it was a similar thing with this recent combating anti-Semitism, hate and extremism bill. It was rushed through without much debate. Just can you explain to the audience what you meant by the House of Approval, and also explain guillotining? A lot of people might not understand what that actually means.
Yeah. So the role of the Senate, in theory, it's actually the state's house. So when you're elected to the Senate, you are there to fight hammer and tong for your state. But what's happened over the past, 100 or so years is political parties, have got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the elected members under that banner have been expected to toe the party line. So what was originally intended for our federal Senate was that a bill may pass the House of Representatives because the government will clearly have the majority of numbers, or a coalition of parties will have the majority of numbers there, so it'll pass. But the bill should then move to the upper house, which is the Senate, and it be robustly debated, amended, or rejected. If it's not sufficient, if it's got unintended consequences which can't be combated, that bill should be rejected, not fixed, because it can't be fixed. And that's the intention of the Senate. But what happens in the real world now is that if a bill passes the House, Labor plus the Greens have sufficient numbers to pass every bill through the Senate. If they can do a deal between those two parties, there's 76 senators and they have the majority plus one between them. So there's no need to negotiate with the opposition or the crossbench. The bill passes. And I know the government has those conversations in advance with the Greens to make sure that any bill they introduce to the House will pass the upper house without a whimper. And you mentioned that guillotine motion. So I think one would expect that when a bill hits the Senate, every senator would have the opportunity to both debate that bill in the chamber, but also put up amendments which would then be debated before the bill's finally voted on in the end. That's the way it should work under normal standing orders. The thing is, right, in the morning, often on a Wednesday or a Thursday, this happens more often than not, actually, very, very often. The Penny Wong will step up on behalf of the Labor Party and suspend standing orders, and she'll move a motion which essentially proposes that all of the standard orders for the day, question time and motions to take note and all the other things that normally happen in a normal day of business are suspended. And what that's replaced by is a whole list of bills, sometimes 5, 10, 12, even more bills can be put up in one day. And there is a time limit put for debate on those bills. So it might be like by 9:00 p.m. today, there'll be no more debate, and then they just have division after division after division after division to pass those bills and vote on amendments and bills which have not been debated in the chamber by your democratically elected senators. If the average person knew this, they would be livid. But unfortunately, most people are relatively disengaged with politics still. I have volunteered every election, I think, since I was 18, and handing out how to vote cards and then scrutineering afterwards. And most people, it's a bit of a chore to go and vote. They're not overly keen to go and exercise their democratic rights. So those types of people I wouldn't expect would be taking a lot of interest between elections either. That's why they get away with it.
A couple of the ideas that Australians for Better Government are proposing, one is to eliminate omnibus bills, which is basically, you get these bills and it's a whole conglomerate of a whole bunch of different things, and it's all very confusing. They should be just passing single issue bills and then debate those adequately. But the other thing is, and a big shout out to Councillor Adam Zara for pitching this to us, is to abolish political affiliation in the Senate. So you can't be part of a political party or a political organization like a union or whatever. And that would make the Senate completely independent. And that's what it says in the Constitution. It says that voters should be electing their elected representative, not a party. It doesn't even mention parties in that part of the Constitution. So, I mean, you're with Ralph Babet in there. I mean, you're probably looking at, parties like the Labor Party and the Greens that often vote in blocks. Labor can't even vote outside what their party tells them to do, even though a lot of them probably argue behind the scenes about it. What do you think about those proposals? Do you think I mean, I can understand why there's parties in the House of Representatives, but when it comes to the Senate, is it necessary to have political parties?
Yeah, so you talk about, members being tied to their party's position on a vote. I think the prime example of that, which people will be quite surprised about, is Senator Fatima Payman. So she was a Labor Party senator from Western Australia. She voted against her party on a division and she was kicked out. So now she is essentially a crossbench independent in the Senate. She's a Labor Party member. And when bills like, the social media ban or the hate groups legislation or the hate crimes amendment from 2025 pop up, we find Fatima voting with Senator Babet and Senator Antic. She was elected a Labor senator. So I think that point itself proves that actually amongst Labor, there would be a bunch of backbenchers especially that believe in freedom of speech and association and movement. But because they are tied to the party line, they either hide in their office when the division comes up, or if they're asked to, they come and vote probably against their conscience, I would say, because I don't think Fatima would be the only person that doesn't think these bills should pass. I find that very interesting. You mentioned the omnibus bills. I'm not a fan of banning omnibus bills because I want to table a whole bunch of omnibus repeal bills. We have too much legislation, and that is my dream one day, to see a massive omnibus repeal bill roll into the Senate and wind back a whole bunch of unnecessary legislation that's been passed over recent decades. And you also talked about abolishing parties in the Senate. I understand the sentiment. I understand the idea, but I also understand the human condition and its desire to be part of a herd. And I understand herd mentality. And I think you'd find that even if we did abolish political party representation in the Senate, they would still form groups and packs, a bit like the Teals do. They're not really a political party, but we kind of know where they stand. And I think the other danger of that could potentially be the fact that it might just be the loudest person on social media that ends up getting elected, maybe not the best person for the job. I think political parties who have a democratic pre-selection process where the grassroots members in that electorate vote to pre-select their candidate probably still is the best process to choose someone to run for parliament. It's not necessarily the loudest person that you want there. It's actually usually the person that has the ability to be objective and benevolent and not really care about their political career that you want to be that politician. So I would be concerned about that. I also understand the intent makes sense, but then I think there's that human reality which could actually be counterproductive.
Well, that's why we call it Australians for better government and not Australians for perfect government, because you're dealing with human nature, and no matter what system you put in place, there's always going to be those niggly things. We're fallible as human beings, whatever. But maybe that omnibus bill that you want to push through, maybe that can be the last one that we pass. And from then on,
sounds like a deal to me. Wasn't it Churchill that said democracy is the worst form of government except for all the rest? He was absolutely right. There is no perfect form of government because we're all human, and humans have those natural desires for money and power and all of those things which end up corrupting any even perfectly designed system will fall due to human imperfectness. Yeah.
Now tell me a bit about like your time in Parliament dealing with other politicians and also other staffers and lobbyists and whatever behind the scenes. I mean, there are a lot of people probably watching this podcast who think that the government's out to get them, and nefarious forces from the World Economic Forum are telling all the politicians what to do, blah, blah, blah. Is that what's really going on behind the scenes, or are these people that actually do feel like they're doing the right thing, but they're maybe a little bit misguided? I mean, what's your thoughts?
I think there's a bunch of useful idiots that are elected. Not all of them, but there are some people there who are probably not conviction politicians, and they're not necessarily making the decisions that are in their conscience, but they're relying heavily on the bureaucracy to guide them, especially those that are in government. I feel like the bureaucracy has got so big that it leads the policy agenda. So yes, those influences from the World Health Organization, the UN, the World Economic Forum, however well-intentioned initially, also those groups have got so big and so much money is now involved that they're somewhat detached from reality. what do they call it in business, in economics? There's sort of economies of scale, which is where you scale a business up to a point where it becomes more efficient and does a better job and makes more money. But then there's also a diseconomies of scale when you get too big, and what's happening at the bottom end of the organization is not even known to the top end of the organization, and those chains of command, and they're completely out of touch with the reality of what's happening in the world. So I believe our bureaucracy has got far too big, and that's leading to legislation purely for the sake of making laws. Politicians call themselves lawmakers, which I find wild. They should be finding ways to simplify laws, to write them in ways that every Australian can understand when they pick it up on first reading. Some of these bills that I go through, I'm not legally trained. We all just work it out as we go. But some of these bills, they do take an awful lot of time to get your head around, because they're drafted in bureaucratic speak, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And there's a lot of generalities in them. They're not very specific about what they intend to achieve. So I feel like the government is probably led by the bureaucracy. And then when you're talking about just politicians in general, I'd say that some of them really go in there with the best of intentions, but they do get caught up by that machine. But a lot of them also get caught up by, oh my goodness, I'm a politician. I don't know what I'd do after this. I really want to be a politician for a long time, so I'll just play it safe. And that's the last person you'd want elected as a representative. I'd much prefer the kind of politician who's going to, wear their heart on their sleeve, use their conviction every time that they vote, and have that attitude that we have in our office, which is pretty clear. It's no legislation is better than bad legislation. So whenever you're reading a bill, it's like, all right, what does it intend to achieve? Okay. Is it just another solution looking for a problem, or is there really a problem that needs to be solved here? And then you're thinking, okay, if there is a problem, this is a solution. Well, what are those consequences that are unintended or maybe intended that shouldn't occur? How do we fix it? And if we can't fix it, it's no. Some bills, you read the first page and you're like, well, that takes away freedom of speech. That's a hard no matter what. That can't be fixed. And other bills, which might just be modernizing an act or whatever, sometimes they are just okay. But there's very few bills that I support for the simple fact that we already have too many laws, and we should be simplifying, not overcomplicating things. There is one other influence within Parliament which gets spoken of a bit now, which is nice. They wear orange lanyards and I don't let them in the door. They're called lobbyists. And politicians sponsor lobbyists. So a lobby group will come to a politician and say, hey, can you sponsor me a pass, please? And what a sponsored pass gives a politician, which I don't think many people out there would understand, is it gives them unrestricted access to the halls of Parliament. They can walk straight past your door. They can knock on the door, and you'll come to the door and they'll try and influence you to their way of thinking or what they're trying to achieve. We could ban lobbyists from Parliament, but that means that I guess politicians do have to talk to interest groups sometimes to understand an issue. I would much prefer to see a public register of lobbyists and who sponsors them, but more importantly than that, a public register of whose offices they visited and when. Because when you see a politician vote in a bit of a strange way, that will allow the people to then go back and say, hang on, that politician met with that lobbyist last week, and it appears to me that they voted a bit differently to what I expected. Maybe there's some influence there. And I think transparency is the way that you squash these things out. While it's murky and in the shadows and you don't really know who's meeting with who, yeah, there is potentially corruption, and there's absolutely influence, whether it's intentional or not, occurring across the board.
Just a reminder, everyone, the link to StreamYard is in the chat if anyone wants to call in and ask Michael a question or, argue with him or whatever you want to do. But I got a question here from Dave. It would be great to hear Michael's opinion of Clive reneging on his retirement from politics. It's more vote splitting. What are your comments on that? And Clive Palmer?
I guess that's Clive's call. I ran with him once. I ran in 2022 on conviction because it was he was one of the few that was willing to stand up to, the intrusions on freedom of speech, the freedom of movement, the vaccine mandates, all of those issues, which were, in my opinion, contrary to our human rights in Australia. Clive is welcome to contest elections, but you don't have to vote for him. You can vote for whoever you want to. Any person who has a registered political party can contest. Now, vote splitting is one of those things, a bit like how to vote cards, that also gets misrepresented. So in our compulsory preferential voting system, you must, in the House of Representatives, number every box in the order that you choose. The only reason vote splitting would affect the outcome is if someone voted for the United Australia Party, and then let's just say, as One Nation was close to getting elected in that seat, but that voter chose to put Labor ahead of One Nation, for example, and then that vote ends up getting parked with Labor if it's a two-party preferred between One Nation and Labor. That's the only example where vote splitting really matters, is when the voter themselves chooses to put a party ahead of another like-minded party intentionally. I think we've got a big job to do to educate people. And Clive's going to be severely hamstrung this election anyway. We know he's spent 100 odd million and then maybe 60 or 70 at the last election. But the government passed a law last year, which comes into effect this July, which severely restricts the amount of money that can be donated to a political party. So my understanding was, I think it's $50,000 per year per donor or donor group. So instead of Clive putting in $100 million, it'll be $50,000 for 3 years. So it's 150 grand. So you may see less yellow advertisements in the newspapers. You may see less of them on TV. I know he's taken it to a high court on that, but it's up to the high court to determine whether those new laws, which I do think actually, well, they'll hurt the Teals massively. So Simon Holmes a court won't be able to put his big money in either. It really does only reward the existing elected members, because at the same time as restricting the amount of money that a donor can contribute to a political party, they increase the amount of money per vote from just over $3 to $5 per vote that you got at the last election. So the party's given themselves more money at the taxpayer's cost. That's not government money, that is taxpayer money, as all government money is. But also they've given existing elected members of parliament administrative funding as well. So I can't remember exactly what it was. Was it $15,000 per quarter? Something like that they get in administrative funding to administer their election campaigns for themselves, to get themselves re-elected. And that's also paid for by taxpayers. So as you can tell, the system is designed that if you vote properly and you take care with your preferences and you give your preferred parties 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you put the ones you don't like right at the bottom, your vote will end up where you want it to go. I've scrutineered, and if you have any doubt over that, this next coming election, volunteer as a scrutineer after and watch the votes counted. You'll be amazed at how the system works.
Look, mate, I want to talk to you about the economy, because I'm interested on your thoughts there. I mean, a hallmark of the era that I grew up in, the Hawke, Keating, Howard era, was economic reform. All those governments pushed through some significant economic reform, but it seems since then we haven't seen much at all. There's been some tax cuts, and obviously there was a COVID period where they had JobKeeper and all that sort of stuff, but nothing significant. What are your thoughts on that when it comes to economic reform? Do you think maybe it was finalized by Keating and Costello and Howard, and we didn't have to do too much after that, or is there still economic reform you'd like to see happen?
Yeah, have a look at your $50 note in your wallet today and think about what it bought you 5 years ago. There is a serious need for reform in Australia. So what people don't realize is they might be like, oh yeah, my $500,000 house is now worth $1 million. Excellent, I've made $500,000. No, what's happened is your dollar's worth 50 cents. It's still the same roof over your head. We have more dollars floating around this country due to home lending, RBA stimulus, and government borrowing, especially over the most recent 6 years, and you feel poorer, but the number in your bank account and the number on your house value has gone up significantly, probably. So yes, there is need of serious reform, and there's also a need for a bit of financial pain. I think this whole 3-year election cycle has got to the point where it's just a contest now at election time as to who can give out the most money to the group that they need to vote for them to get them across the line in a two-party preferred basis. And I think now is the time for conviction politics. Now is the time for classical liberal economics where, debt does matter, where money needs to be worth something, and it can't just be something that you print and borrow constantly. And I truly think our Treasurer is relying heavily on Australian consumers via home loan debt to keep this economy spinning while he continues to create a whole bunch of non-market jobs. So over the past, so in 2024, more than 4 out of 5 jobs created were funded by taxpayers. So they're called non-market sector jobs. The private sector's died. Jim Chalmers thinks that he can continually to take money from a shrinking pool of taxpayers and prop up the economy to make unemployment look good, when the reality is he should be reducing taxpayer-funded jobs. He should be reducing government debt, because if you post a surplus and you repay some debt, you take some money out of the economy. And if there's less money in the economy, everyone's dollar is then worth more. Your buying power goes up. We've all got used to this concept of money being worth less and less and less every year. And I don't think that's okay. I think there is an awful lot of need for repealing of legislation which gets in the way of productivity. And when I say that, I'm talking about unnecessary workplace laws. We have a right to disconnect. Employees, that's a law that the Labor Party passed. An employer can't text his employee at 6 o'clock at night about what's happening the next day. You have a right to disconnect from your boss. Well, your boss also has a right to not employ you. There has to be a bit of give and take in the world. And if we want a productive economy, we need government to get out of the lives of both employers and employees and allow productivity to rise. And the only way that we can increase productivity is to remove the regulatory barriers to productive use of your time at work, but also reform the tax system to the point where it once again encourages aspiration. Like a 45% income tax bracket that kicks in under $200,000 is unique in the world. That is a massive disincentive for people to work really hard and earn decent money. The other thing I wanted to say around this stuff is there's a lot of focus on migration at the moment. And yes, this concept of catch-up migration was a scam. We didn't need to catch up. We just need to continue normal migration numbers. But the reality is that it wasn't migration that caused house prices to surge rapidly in 2021. What it was all of the government and Reserve Bank stimulus in that era. What they did was they increased the money in circulation massively. In 2021, we only had net migration of 9,000 people, 9,000. House prices jumped 24.5%. That shouldn't happen if it's migration that causes higher house prices. What's caused house prices to surge is the fact that the Reserve Bank not only cut interest rates to 0.1, which was a ridiculous overreaction. What they also did was they went to the banks and they offered them, well, they gave them $181 billion worth of money by what they called the term funding facility at 0.1% for 3 years. And then what happened? Australian consumers, all of a sudden their borrowing capacity went through the roof. So they went and borrowed as much money as they could. They went and bought $1 million houses, which were $700,000 houses a year before, and they made themselves slaves to debt for the next 20 to 30 years. It's increase in money in circulation that is the problem. And when that happens quickly, that creates both inflation, but a massive gap between what you earn and what that money can buy you.
Look, this is the chart of silver and gold in the last year, and you can see how high it's gone. Thankfully, silver's come down a little bit, or a lot. It was going crazy at one point, but I've heard it said by plenty of different people that if you were to buy a house in the 1970s and say hypothetically it costs you 10 ounces of gold to buy that property, it would now also cost you 10 ounces of gold to buy that property. So what that's saying is that your house is not increasing in value in terms of real value, or it's just the amount of money, the physical paper money that's flowing around the system, and that's inflation, and that's coming from government spending, and the government wants to ignore that and not talk about it. Now, we played that cold open in the beginning of Andrew Charlton, who is the federal member for Parramatta. He's a Labor a man. He was a financial advisor to Kevin Rudd. So I guess don't hold that against him, because I don't know, that was a very successful period of time. But he proposed those ideas about, instead of using interest rates to curb inflation, because it seems like homeowners are the ones copping the brunt for higher interest rates and trying to curb inflation. Maybe we should use the GST as a lever, or maybe superannuation. I mean, do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, I tend to lean towards the GST option. I know a lot of people are scared about talking about reforming the GST, but I think if you can go out there and earn more of your own money, and if you want to keep that money, that's fine, but if you want to spend it, then you get penalized. I think that's a better option than getting higher income tax. What are your thoughts?
Income tax is not a productivity boosting tax. Income tax is a tax on your earnings, and you are much better off focusing on that taxing on consumption, because you can choose to buy more stuff, or you can choose to not buy more stuff. If you want to buy the luxuries in life, you will end up paying a little bit more tax. But someone who is struggling won't spend as much money, so they'll end up paying less tax and keeping more of their own money. So you're right. I do prefer those consumption taxes over dumb taxes like income tax or payroll tax. Is an absolutely egregious tax. That's a state-based tax whereby, as in a business grows in size and starts to employ more people who pay income tax to the government en masse, the state government decides they will punish those employers by charging them a payroll tax for growing and employing more people. Talk about a sort of a counterproductive tax. I'd lean more towards those consumption taxes. But I think the other thing that we need to consider is the topic of the year seems to be around migration, population growth, all of those things. Everything the government does largely disincentivizes parents from raising their own children and parents to have more children. So simple mechanisms like they have in America, where when you go to lodge your tax return, instead of lodging your tax return as an individual, because I don't know about you, Steve, I'm pretty old fashioned. I'm married, and the day I was married, we became a couple, and everything we do is shared. I believe you should be able to file your tax returns jointly. So if I earn $100,000 and my wife's raising the children, doing a far harder job than I do, we would pay tax on $50,000 each, rather than $100,000 for me getting taxed at a higher tax bracket and the family having less money. Really simple reforms like that, they're far more productive than the silly idea like a baby bonus, because a baby bonus will go to people who are not working. Whereas an income splitting scenario rewards those who are working hard as a couple and sharing those responsibilities, and allows you to keep more of your own money. You're not taking anyone else's money, you're just keeping a bit more of your own that you can spend on your children. There's other concepts like, for every child you have, maybe your tax-free threshold jumps from 20,000 to 30 to 40. It allows you to keep enough money each year to pay for the basic cost of your living and that of a child, and then two children, and then 3 children. Concepts like that really need to be considered, because they're just minor tweaks to the existing system, but they would have a material benefit to the quality of life of young couples as they try to buy a home, but then also aim to have children. And I think our lower birth rates are a number of factors, but I have seen a bunch of studies that show that the biggest factor in people delaying or choosing not to have many children is financial stress. we need to do what we can to minimize that stress on young people who are seeking to grow the population domestically.
Mate, you're getting me fired up talking about income splitting and taxation. I mean, my own personal situation, I work in construction. I get paid by the hour, and obviously I do night shift, and I get penalty rates for that. And it's a good living. It's been able to, get me ahead in life. But in the recent last 2 months or so, I mean, from the 27th of December to Australia Day, I had 3 nights off. I was working all those other nights, working 10 to 11, 12-hour shifts, big hours per week and per fortnight. In the last 2 weeks, I've only had 1 night off. That's tonight, and I'm doing the podcast. So in one of my pay slips there, I got taxed an incredible amount. And obviously I'm not going to get that much money per fortnight every fortnight of the year. Obviously it's going to go back to normal. I'm not going to earn as much, but I calculated that if I was to get that amount of money every fortnight for a year, I would have got taxed $130,000, which to me is just criminal, because the government would take that money, give it to people that don't do anything and don't deserve it. They'd spend it on the bureaucracy and government departments that do nothing and go and have 3-hour lunch breaks all day, every day. They send it overseas to foreign countries, and they use it to turn this country into a socialist country. And there's no incentive to go out there and work hard. Whereas at the same time, I've got a wife who only just went back to work, but she wasn't working because she was raising our kids. So that's where income splitting would come into play. And we've also got a mortgage, and we're getting hammered because the government keeps spending money, raising, and that's resulting in interest rates being put up to curb inflation. Where is the incentive to go out, start a family, work hard, work long hours, buy a home, and get ahead in life? It just seems like you're the one getting knocked on the head, where you've got all these politicians in Canberra making these decisions that are not helping anyone.
And it's getting worse, Steve. It's not just the tax aspects either. It's the cost to government of childcare and early learning. So in South Australia now, beloved, Premier, who everyone seems to love, Peter Malinowskis, he's just announced they're bringing preschool forward to 3 years of age. So what we used to call kindergarten will now start at 3 years of age. So the state will have your child from 3 till 18, but before they're 3 years old, they will have them in childcare for 3 years. And what's childcare subsidised by? The taxpayers. So it costs an awful lot of taxpayer money to expand childcare, early learning, reception, and then all the way through school. Imagine the savings to Jim Chalmers' budget if more families were able to split their incomes, manage those roles between the working parties, and spend more time with their own kids during the week and raise their own children. You're not relying on the taxpayer to subsidize the care, and you have that finite period of time when children are young to train them up how you want, to train them in values, to train them in what matters in life. I believe it's a win-win, but unfortunately it would result in less government control over both you, me, and our children. And I'm sure they're not that interested in that sort of concept.
Mate, I just feel like when we talk about stuff like that, this country is really on the wrong path, and I don't know who's going to come along and fix it. But one of the things I also want to talk to you about is Donald Trump at the moment, and he's using tariffs. What do you feel about tariffs? Because when I was in Adelaide at ABG Revival, Mark Neugebauer and a lot of people in Adelaide were telling me about the manufacturing sector that you guys used to have down there, and used to manufacture cars, and in World War II you're manufacturing aircraft and all sorts of things. That's all gone, and it doesn't look like it's coming back. So what are your thoughts on maybe Australia following a similar path of using tariffs?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of tariffs, and I'll say that openly, because I understand that the tariffs initially, I think Trump uses tariffs mostly as a negotiating tool. It's sort of a stiff arm to say, hey, do a deal with me or I'll punish you financially in the short term. But I understand that for tariffs with a product where there is maybe an inelastic demand, you're the only one that produces it in the world and the only one that can, maybe they would work for a period of time before other countries adapt and find another way to get whatever they needed. But for products in a world that is global, where there is an awful lot of trade and we have a sort of a just-in-time economy in terms of supply chains, tariffs only work in the very short term. Trump always says, you know, the other country is going to pay for it. But in reality, what ends up happening, so in America, much like Australia, they can't produce cheap widgets like China can. You walk into a Kmart, Big W, a Walmart, Walgreens, whatever it is in America, they have the same stuff as us that's made in China. Those products cannot be made for the same price in Australia right now, with the taxes, the wages, the cost of electricity is a massive factor in Australia. Those things can't be matched here. So what ends up happening is, say a tariff of 20% is applied. Yeah, maybe the middleman pays it for a very short period of time, but eventually that cost gets passed on to the retailer, and then the retailer passes that cost on to the end consumer. So ultimately, the American people, when they walk into Walmart to buy that cheap drink bottle, it might be, they'll end up paying an extra 20% for that drink bottle, because the supply chain's not going to produce that product unless they're making the same profit margin. So those costs will be passed on. Unless a product similar can be sourced from another country that's competitive, you'll end up paying that tariff as a consumer. There are other products in Australia, potentially steel and aluminium, as I've seen someone just comment, whereby we do have a bit of a natural advantage. We dig iron ore out of the ground. But our biggest Achilles heel right now is the net zero agenda and the destruction of our baseload energy. In South Australia, our Premier attempted to create a hydrogen industry, which would take 1 unit of energy and turn it into a portion of a unit of energy. What a silly concept that is. And it would cost far more than that original unit of energy, because you've had a whole bunch of processes in between to separate water and hydrogen and then put it in a gas bottle and then eventually burn that right at the end. It's a wild concept. So until we turn back to stable baseload energy that we can produce from the hydrocarbons that we have here in the ground, I don't see us also becoming competitive in those industries, because the nations where we're exporting our coal to are burning that coal and producing the end products more efficiently than we are. And our workplace legislation as well, our minimum wages, and also just the level of bureaucracy that's required to get approval for any project of any type in Australia. Time is not your friend in business. It's that time frame from a concept to approval and then starting to make money, where most businesses will go broke. You need an awful lot of cash to bankroll yourself through the bureaucracy of local council, state government and federal government approvals by the time that you get something off the ground. So we have a lot of issues. Tariffs are sort of a bit of a desperate step to try and hang on to an industry that hasn't been destroyed usually because of tariffs. The industry's been destroyed due to tax, regulation and legislation, which has made the industry no longer competitive in our nation.
I want to talk to you about the South Australian election and maybe tie in some Liberal Party, One Nation talk as well. But before we get off the economy, housing reform, this is a big part of things as well. Do you have any ideas on housing reform? Because Labor talk a big game about how they're going to provide more houses, but it just doesn't seem to happen, and nothing really seems to happen, and housing just seems to get more and more out of control.
I'll start by trying to list everything Labor's done, which has made the situation worse. So first time owners grants, all they do is push up the price of land and builds. I know in my job, I've been doing it for 12 years. Every time a first time owners grant or a construction grant comes out, the price of land goes up and the price of the build goes up. The grant might be 15 grand. The consumer ends up paying an extra 30. It happens straight away. Shared equity schemes. So the government owning a portion of your home. You go to buy a house, now you only have to borrow enough money to fund 60% of that house. So instead of, saving up a deposit slowly, it taking time, having to put 20% together, borrowing 80% of a home, 80% of a lower priced home that you can actually afford, you can now, instead of buying a $600,000 or $700,000 house, you can buy $1 million home, and the taxpayer or the government can own 30 or 40% of that. that pushes house prices up as well. And what people don't realize is when they enter into a shared equity scheme with the government, they're still paying 100% of the council rates. They're paying 100% of the cost to maintain that home. They're paying 100% of the insurance. They're paying 100% of every cost associated with owning that property. And the taxpayer or the government sitting on the side, owning an equity stake, but not contributing any money to the ownership of that home until such time as maybe you can one day borrow a bit more money to buy them out, but at the inflated current market price. So they don't work. What else are they doing? That build to rent. So there's this scheme that passed the federal parliament a year or two ago where only a selective group, so you're talking sort of super funds, your big managed funds like BlackRock and Vanguard, etc., can put up a proposal to build a big apartment block or a big unit block, and they get massive tax incentives. So they get accelerated depreciation. They get all sorts of tax breaks that the average punter doesn't get when they build a property to rent out, on the condition that they never sell those homes. So they are build to rent, and they get inflated returns and inflated tax benefits simply because they have more money than us. That also doesn't help the system, because what that's doing is it's further adding more bureaucracy to the housing market, which is the last thing that we need. And, you know, everything they do is not working. What would work is actually relatively simple. Stamp duty is another one of those taxes that is just a tax because state governments need money. That is a tax that needs to go. And if I was to propose massive reforms, here's a concept for you. I'd take income tax away from the federal government. I think states should be able to levy their own income taxes, because I want the states, instead of colluding, to compete for business, to compete for population, and to compete for businesses to enter their state because it is a low tax jurisdiction, because it's a low regulatory jurisdiction. You want, like Ron DeSantis, for example, in Florida, he's recently proposed to not charge property taxes, so no council rates on homes for people that live in Florida. And how's he done that? Because he's attracted all sorts of population from California and New York who are socialist states, who are in trouble and have to tax the crap out of you to pay their bills, whereas he's run a responsible budget. And now they can actually have the good fortune of saying, if you live in Florida, there will be no council rates on your home. So it can be done. It can be done because Florida is pumping, because all of the investment, the capital in America, is moving there, because it's both an attractive place to live, an attractive place to operate a business, an attractive place to earn an income.
So the answer is for everyone to move to Florida, is what you're saying?
Yeah, to move to Florida, no. Australia is still far superior to America. As much as we whinge, I'm not one who is whinging just for the sake of it. I'm whinging just to reveal what is wrong with modern politics, but to encourage everyone listening, get seriously involved, join a party, actually participate in democracy, vote in pre-selection of candidates. You may not be able to fix a party initially, but the main thing is that the people you pre-select have conviction, and that you are there to hold them to account if they ever waver from what they tell you they believe. We need to hold politicians to account. And by yelling on social media or protest voting or not voting on election day, you actually feed them departing from what they should be doing. You need to be actively involved by their side and making sure that they do the right thing. And if they don't, put your own hand up or make sure someone else runs, because the way to fix politics is by being involved. You fix nothing by sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I agree with your comments about stamp duty. Another aspect of that, and I've just gone through this as well, is that you purchasing a property, you got half an hour to do an inspection at the most. I mean, you know, it's not a lot of time to choose a massive financial investment that you're about to put in. You might be able to go a couple of weeks and have a look at it multiple times, but it's still not a lot of time. So if you make the wrong decision, you're pretty much locked in, because if you're to buy and sell again, you have to pay that stamp duty again.
That's
it's
right.
such a limiting thing. I mean, I think it locks people into not being able to have the flexibility of moving around. And people make mistakes. People make the wrong decisions. Not everything can always go perfectly. So, I mean, I think that's another aspect of why stamp duty needs to go. But I don't necessarily agree with land tax as well. But that can maybe be a discussion for another time, because I really want to talk to you about the upcoming South Australian election, because you're in South Australia. We spoke to Mark Neugebauer last week a little bit about it, mainly because everyone's pumping up the polling at the moment, saying that the Liberal Party is on the nose, One Nation's on the rise, but the only polling that really matters is on election day. So that's going to be the real litmus test of how things are really traveling. And we've got a comment and a question here from Nicholas. Nicholas says, does Michael think that Pauline will be able to capitalize on this rising success, or will the problems with the party come to the surface?
Yeah, there's a bit of a so in 1998, I think it was in Queensland, she got 11 members elected. They all left within a couple of years, and that was early on. That was, we're talking nearly 30 years ago. So it's been a long road for Pauline to get to where she is. She disappeared for a while in between, and then got re-elected to the Senate. Now they did have a really good result last federal election and grabbed Malcolm Roberts plus 2 others. So now she's got a little team going there. She's got herself, Malcolm Roberts, Sean Bell, and Tyron Whitten from Western Australia. Obviously, Barnaby's jumped ship from the Nationals to One Nation as well. But what I thought was telling was that Barnaby chose to run for the Senate. So he's running for the Senate in 2028. I think a lot of supporters, it would have really boosted if he chose to say, I'm going to run for New England and I want to be the leader of the party in the lower house long term and aim to be opposition leader. That told me a lot. In South Australia, though, the One Nation polls, we don't have many specific South Australian election polls, which is a little bit annoying. I feel like they need to do a few more. But I had a look at the numbers the other day, and what's happened is One Nation only got a handful. Was it 5 or 6% last time in the state election? They've jumped up to pretty much level pegging with the Liberal Party, because the Nationals they run in very few seats. They get very few votes in South Australia. It really is just a Liberal Party state at this point in time. But I was adding up the numbers, and I'm pretty sure between Liberal and One Nation in the 2022 state election, it was about 39% primary vote. That 39% is still the number. It's just reshuffled between the Liberal Party and One Nation. So that's a long way off the 50% that you need in a two-party preferred manner to win a seat and also to win government generally. We've seen the Labor Party maintain their vote, and I saw the Greens were up by about another 3%. So between Labor and the Greens, they were above 50%. Just between those two parties, when you don't factor in any sort of, preference leakage. Well, they're looking pretty strong, Labor, to form government. The Liberals, based off this polling, could be reduced to just a handful of seats or even just a couple if it's a really bad day. What's going to be really interesting is, because the Liberal Party primary vote is reduced, in regional seats, there is the chance for someone else to get elected. And in regional South Australia, Labor don't get much of a vote. So the odds of it going to Labor are slim, but they could pick up some if they get lucky. But we've seen heaps of just random opportunistic independents throw their hand up. And also we're going to see One Nation get a chunk of the vote regionally, because that's where the strongest vote is, regional, and then outer metro locations, sort of the blue collar working spaces. So in the lower house, we'll see Labor form government probably. In the upper house is going to be pretty wild. So the Libs usually get, 4 or 5 upper house members. That could be reduced to 2 or 3. Corey Bernardi's put his hand up, so he'll probably win an upper house seat. I think One Nation will get at least 1, potentially 2. And if the polls are true, there's a chance of 3. But the upper house is a bit different, because you don't just have maybe 4 or 5 local candidates. In the upper house, you'll have a good 30 or 40 different candidates and a whole bunch of different parties. You got, Family First and Australian Family Party and all sorts of competition there, and a bunch of Liberals that are running as independents as well in the upper house. So it's going to be pretty messy. You've got Sarah Game, who left One Nation last year, now running her own party Fair Go, I think it's something like that it's called. She's running a candidate, a former Adelaide Crows player. So it's going to be messy. There's going to be chaos. The Liberals have had 3 leaders recently, which hasn't been great. And then the federal mess, like the change of leadership and just the lack of conviction that we saw from Susan Ley has also really hurt the state team. So that's to One Nation's benefit. We'll wait and see what happens. Yeah.
Tell me about Corey Bernardi, because he's just joined the One Nation party. Famously, he tried to start the Australian Conservatives a handful of years ago, and he's been out of politics since then. Obviously, he's got gigs on Sky News and different places. But do you think he's going to have an effect on the voters in South Australia?
That same poll, the Fox and Hedgehog one, I think is the only one we've got really for South Australia. It had the approval ratings for certain individuals. And what I found fascinating was Pauline Hanson was really popular, but Corey not as much. So, but I guess mostly because he's probably been out of the public eye for a good 5 years now. He's got a oyster business in Coffin Bay, which is good. It's mean he's spent a bit of time getting his hands dirty and experiencing the reality of an industry where, you know, it can be up and down, which is nice. But I think he'll be seen as a leader that has some runs on the board. So it's probably a good thing. Although, you know, the media spun it as, you know, a win from the Liberal Party taking Corey Bernardi, but, you know, they didn't actually mention the fact that he left the Liberal Party a long time ago, started Australian Conservatives and has been out of politics for a while. So that, I guess that's the true story. I think Corey will be useful in the upper house in South Australia. He's pretty good in Parliament. He'll be good at holding the Labor government to account. And I think South Australian voters, my advice would be that when you vote, be very deliberate in the upper house to make sure that it's likely Labor will have just an absolute massive majority in the lower house. So it's on us to make sure that they're held to account in the upper house. So we need to give as many candidates as possible a chance to get elected in the upper house before you preference Labor. Because if Labor get too many upper house seats or the Greens get too many upper house seats, it could end up being a bit like the federal parliament at the moment, where you've got majority in the lower house and you've got passage through the Senate for pretty much everything you want. And that would be disastrous for our state, because we do need opposition and we need parliamentarians in there that are willing to expose legislation which is counterproductive to our state.
Talk to me about the Liberals and One Nation too, because I mean, you look at Reform UK, similar to trajectory as One Nation, but they've got a long way to go. It's 4 years to the next general election in the UK, so who knows what could happen before then. Same thing with One Nation. Okay, yes, they're riding high in the polls. We do have this South Australian election coming up in late March, which is going to be telling. Victorian elections later in the year, who knows what's going to happen. You said South Australia is going to be a mess. I think Victoria is going to be even just a bigger mess. I think the real litmus test is probably New South Wales in March 2027. I think that's going to be a big, massive test for both the Liberal Party and One Nation. But the federal election, way off in 2028. And a lot of people have been saying, well, if they can put Angus Taylor as the Liberal leader, then he'll probably peel back a lot of those votes from One Nation. But that's not what happened during the week. Angus Taylor has been elected as the deputy, the opposition leader, the leader of the Liberal Party. And I had to chuckle when I saw this image up on X, which is a take on Susan Ley. And they've superimposed Angus Taylor on there. And really, I guess what this is saying is they've replaced one dud with another. Angus Taylor doesn't fill me with any inspiration or any hope that he can bring the Liberal Party back to prominence. So, I mean, how do you see things going? Do you think One Nation can continue this ride? Do you think they can get into a position where they can be a credible opposition, or is this a sugar hit?
It's gone further than I thought it would, to be brutally honest, Stephen. I didn't foresee polling that would be sitting in the 20s. That's a massive first preference vote. But in Angus Taylor's defence, I have spent a bit of time the last few days watching what he's put out since he's become leader, and he has hit a lot of the good notes so far. But, you know, by their fruit you shall know them. So I'm going to wait to judge his actions. The words have been okay around tax, around immigration, around values. Those sorts of things have been really solid, but we'll wait and see. But the issue for One Nation is this, right? So they're a minor party with centralised power. that has been the Achilles heel of any competitor that's tried to challenge the major party system. The strength of the major parties, especially the Liberal Party, which the parliamentary party it has not reflected the grassroots membership. That's the truth. The Liberal Party We Believe statement is a brilliant statement. It's something that I wholeheartedly agree with. I'm more of a classical liberal than you would say conservative. I think classical liberalism has stood the test of time. It's got the same values as, say, what we would call conservatism in the modern day, but it has that sort of more longer term vision and hope in it. And it's upon the Liberal Party to act that way, to show us what they're going to do over a 10, 20-year period to create a better Australia, because progress can be for good. Conservatives fall in that trap of opposing everything, being negative, pumping the brakes, but never really steering the car in a different direction. So I think One Nation is popular right now, largely, they only got 6% at the last federal election, and they've jumped to 20, up to 30% on some polls, largely in response to the people protesting against the lack of leadership from the Liberal Party, the lack of alignment of policies with their values. At the last federal election, they were promising higher taxes than Labor. That's an insane concept to me, that the party of small government, lower taxes and personal responsibility would proposing a higher tax agenda at an election. Of course you're going to lose. But the challenge to One Nation is to democratize, to set up branches that empower their members to get something for their membership. Because in minor parties, often your membership is just a donation. Occasionally they'll hold an event and talk at you and you'll have a bit of fun and they'll say all the right things and a few sort of buzzwords, but you won't actually get the ability to then participate in something like a state council and feed policy up to the parliamentary team. You won't get to participate as a delegate of your local branch in a pre-selection for your Senate candidates or your local House of Representatives candidate. Those sorts of things are the challenges for One Nation: to decentralize the power, to trust individual states to start operating and recruiting the best talent possible, and to put together a policy agenda that goes well beyond the big statements, which, I agree with most of their policies, they're great, but to put together a team that can competently execute those policies. You've got to be able to put together a ministry to the people and say, this is our defense minister, this is our treasurer, and this is how we will achieve these things. Because even if what they say sounds great from a policy perspective, even something that we agree with, there's always consequences to your actions. So it's important that policies are well thought through, and that democracy is shown within the party. Because if you're going to run the nation as a democracy, a party can't be run as a dictatorship. That's not okay. And I know they are setting up branches, but the next challenge is to empower those branches to act independently, to select the best person for the job.
Mate, I agree completely with what you just said, and I said that on the podcast last week. As One Nation starts to grow, the more they grow, the more Pauline and James Ashby need to take the hands off the wheel. And Pauline does that to a point. She lets some of these states act independently, but at somewhere along the line, she comes and swings that big hammer and knocks them all down. I mean, that's got to stop, in my view. And it's like a business. As a business grows, I mean, the owner has to slowly take the hands off the power, even though he was the one or she was the one that built it with their own hands and their own effort. But I agree completely with that. It brings me, I want to finish up with this question. It brings me to Ralph Babet. Now, I'm interested to see if you would disagree with this, but he seems like a solid fit for One Nation if he was to jump across. And I got a call from my mum just a couple of weeks ago, and she said, "Oh, I heard that Ralph Babet's quitting politics." I mean, and she's a big, a fan of Ralph. What's the situation there? I mean, with Ralph Babet, is he going to continue? Is he finishing up? And is there any thoughts maybe in his head, looking at the polls, that maybe he could jump across to the One Nation and be a good fit there?
One thing I'll tell you about Ralph is he's actually not an opportunist. He's incredibly loyal. And he was elected with the United Australia Party. And whenever these things come up, he said, well, that's how I got elected. Why would I jump ship? he didn't get in on his own name. He got in because he ran with the United Australia Party and their campaign got him in. When we ran back in 2022, we had no brand. No one knew who we were. Yeah, we worked crazy for 6 months with the local volunteers and did what we could. But one individual who's not known can only lift the vote by a very small amount. So Ralph's incredibly loyal. He has said from the beginning that he didn't want to be a career politician. I always tell him, mate, why not? Kick on. Like you've made some ground. Maybe in the next parliament, the numbers could be different. And wouldn't it be fun to be in a balance of power situation? So, I'll urge him to have a crack because, he's getting the hang of it. His style's not for everyone. He's a wild child, but Ralph is what he is, and he has a good heart. And he truly cares about the Australian people and about liberty, that's for sure. So, I reckon he should have another crack, but I don't think he said that publicly yet. So I'll let him make his own mind up as to what he wants to do. But there's nothing worse than when a member of parliament uses a political vehicle to get elected, their ego goes to their head, and then they think they can do whatever they want. There has to be some loyalty there. He was elected on a policy platform and with a certain party. So I think it's important that he sees that through because everyone that voted for him expects him to do that. They don't want to see people jumping ship. I actually don't think it's right to poach politicians from other parties. If you are elected on a party platform, you resign and you run and you get elected on another party platform. Do it the right way. Honor the people that voted for you to be elected to fulfill a certain promise that you offered them at that election.
Well, he was elected UAP, but there's nothing holding him back from being re-elected for another party, I suppose.
Correct. That's right. And that would be, if you were going to change parties, that's how you would do it. You'd say, look, you know what? Thanks for my time. I appreciate it. I saw my term out, but I'm going to resign and I'm going to run with a different party. And if I get elected by the people with that party, excellent. I'll kick on with that new party. I think that would be the fair way to do it.
Yeah, interesting. All right, mate. Just quickly, before we get to the last question, this is a comment from Dave. Everything Michael has said tonight shows he aligns very well with the People First Party. Perfect fit. What do you say about that, Mike?
Oh, I know Jared very well. We talk often. We align on a lot of things. Probably not everything. But a lot of things, mostly because we value liberty and we value small government and I guess transparency and accountability. They're probably the four things that we align most on. I'm very disappointed to see Jared not in Parliament anymore because you have a look at what he's been replaced by and you're like, we need more thinking people in that place. We need people that actually understand how money works because our treasurer certainly doesn't and very few people do. So people like Senator Rennick need to stay in the public eye, they need to stay involved in politics. And I'm hoping that one day again, he can reemerge in that sphere because we need talents like that can hold the bureaucracy to account. And he ran circles around them and he truly cared about the people. I think one of the reasons why Senator Rennick probably didn't get pre-selected is he spent most of his time from 2020 through to 2023 or 24 dealing with people who had their lives destroyed by the government's response to COVID. People who maybe suffered injuries, people who lost their businesses, those sorts of things. He genuinely cares. So, thank you for saying that. I think Jared speaks a lot of sense. And from an economic perspective, he's come up with some really cool policies that probably mirror most of the things I've said tonight.
All right, mate. Final segment of the show. This is the most important part of Command the Narrative. It's called Build Your Own Fantasy Government. Now, Michael Arbon, you're going to be in control of the next Parliament of Australia. And you can choose 5 or 6 people. They can be living or dead. They don't have to be politicians. They can be anyone that you want, but the idea is that you want to pick a leadership team that can really take Australia into the next direction. So who do you pick?
Well, if I can pick anyone living or dead, it's Jesus Christ and I only need one. It's that simple, Stephen. But if you're talking sort of politicians, oh man, that's a question on the spot. I don't trust any one person. See, that's my problem is I understand that no one's perfect. And I guess you do need a team of 5 or 6 to hold each other to account, don't you? So we're going to have to pick Menzies. He's going to have to be in there. Reagan. It's going to be quite a team we're going to put together here. I'm trying to think who else from the past would I put in. It's actually really hard. I can't put together a dream team without thinking about this for a long time because I don't shoot from the hip,
like putting people on the spot though. You probably would get better answers out of people if they had more time to think about it. But
but it's good. You're really making me think. Who else can I pluck out of thin air here? I'm a bit of a nerd. I read a lot of old Austrian economists. So Friedrich Hayek, I really like Hayek. I don't know if you've read much of his stuff. He's awesome. Thomas Sowell, who wrote Basic Economics, he can run the economy. So he's our numbers guy. All you need is Thomas Sowell controlling the money, and you're good to go.
Yeah, very good.
There's my 4. I've got no one else for you.
That's all right. I think that's a pretty mean team. I think we'd be all right with that leadership team. So very good, mate. Look, I appreciate you coming on. Let everyone know how they can follow you. I know you've got your X account. You can follow Michael on X at what's ARBS? Is that your business or?
That's my nickname. So Arbs. My surname's Arbon. So having grown up in the country, my dad, me, and my son, we're all called Arbs. Your surname gets shortened. That's how it works.
Yeah. That makes sense. So is X the best place if people want to?
I'm a prolific Facebook poster as well. I really should stop engaging in social media, but I really just post and run nowadays. So Facebook, X, and Instagram is what I maintain mostly. I haven't given into the TikTok sphere or anything like that. But those 3, look up Michael Arbon. You'll find me straight away. Feel free to jump on and criticize all you like or agree if you do. Yeah. I've never blocked anyone, Steve, ever. I've never blocked a single person. That's great. I'm going to try and run with that forever.
Mate, I don't think you're going hard enough. That's probably the problem.
Probably
hey, tell me about your radio show as well, because you're doing a bit of radio now as well.
Yeah, so Flow FM, cool radio channel there, regional South Australia, New South Wales and Victoria, 11:15 every Monday. Try and jump on and talk it pretty straight in terms of finance and politics, so a bit of both. Also do the financial markets commentary for them throughout the week as well. But I think, there's actually been, I've really enjoyed doing the radio show because I feel like on social media and stuff, you end up talking to the same algorithm. It's the same people. You're talking to like-minded people and you're not really getting challenged, but you jump on the radio and these poor people in regionals, SA, Victoria, and New South Wales, they've got about 1 radio channel to choose from. So they're stuck with me for a period of time, but you get some really interesting feedback. Like you're talking to people who may not think the way you think. But also you're making them think a little bit differently. It's like, actually maybe more money isn't the solution to every problem. Maybe more money is actually the problem, not the solution. So it would be pretty cool.
Mate, I've really enjoyed having you on and talking about this stuff. I mean, it's part of, I love talking about finance and the economy and stuff as well. I wish we could go back to the days of Howard where that seemed to be the main focus of things, not all the other garbage that they talk about these days. But, I mean, I've had economists on before and you've, in my opinion, you've probably provided more solutions and ideas than they have. I mean, there's a lot. So I've enjoyed that. Hopefully we can get you back on in the future and discuss it all again. There's still a lot more to talk about. So thank you for coming on tonight.
Thanks, Steve. Keep up your great work. And one day we'll celebrate when we finally get income splitting. That is the one, I think. Yes. We need to tick that off because you watch those birth rates run up.
My problem is the kids will be out of the house by then, so it won't help me. But
you're going to have to. Maybe your children will benefit. That's how we should vote. Yeah. We should vote not for ourselves, but for our children.
Yeah, good. Well said, mate. All right, everyone. Thank you for keeping with us tonight. Hope you enjoyed this discussion. I know people did from the comments. And please check us out on commandingthenarrative.com. You'll find all our stuff there and hit the sign up button in the top right-hand corner to keep up to date. But for now, we'll see you all next time. See you later. Bye.